It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Denmark's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin, and today we'll be looking at Denmark's squad for the 2022 World Cup. This preamble is going to be the same for every mediacast we do for players, so those familiar with it can jump ahead to around 4 minutes where we begin to talk about the team. And the times for each section are are at the top of the show notes now. And for YouTube watchers, those will include a timestamp that you can click on directly to go to the point that you want to. For those looking for a quick version of this, you can skip to near the end of the mediacast, the last 10 minutes where we summarize the likely starters. Just prior to that, with about 20 minutes remaining, we'll have some discussion on the squad, the main issues with the squad, their club affiliations, some stats, and an overview of new, injured, and outgoing players. We will also be editing this mediacast into a shorter version for those who are just looking for an overview. For those looking for a deeper dive, you've come to the right place. We go through the players and how likely each one is to make the final squad. We explain why we think so and give information on each player's history and standing with the squad. The way we do this is by first organizing the players into their designated positions. And we always note that these are a bit artificial since players don't always play in their coded positions, but we will point that out. And overall, even though it's a bit artificial, it's a good way to organize the discussion. Then we go through the players and share some of the data we've collected in our soccer files, and we use that data to predict how likely the player is to make the team, based mostly on their recent participation, but a couple of other factors as well. We categorize them into definite, likely, possible but unlikely, and seems to be off the squad. And we also mention big players who have recently retired, and we make note of any players who are currently injured. And at the end, we finish by a quick run through of the squad again and try to determine which players will actually be the starters. Right. Now, for those following on YouTube, we have a very simple graphic where we list the names and you can actually see the players' names written. And this is the same broadcast for the audio podcast. So we're going to try to repeat the names a few times to help listeners familiarize themselves with the players' names so that you know who's who when they step onto the field. You can impress your friends by telling them what you've learned here. And that's as much as we can do to this point. But as the rosters are being published, we will do an update episode on the teams and the players. For the players, that will essentially be going over our predictions, updating them based on the games played to that point, and revealing which players were selected. So there are some friendlies at the end of September and prior to the Cup. So there may be a few changes and injuries, for example. So anyway, keep your eye out for those update mediacasts, probably in mid-November. All right, let's go on to talk about Denmark. And we're going to begin with takeaways from previous podcasts. So we did do a podcast on Denmark as a team prior to the Euro 2020 Euro Cup, Euro 2020. And that was actually in the summer of 2021. And we also did a podcast on the teams for the World Cup. So that's Group D. So those are more focused on the teams. But I think we did mention a little bit about players in that Euro Cup podcast. But this is really the first time we've examined their players. So most of the takeaways are based on the team. And we noted with Denmark that they're good in tournaments if they manage to reach it. So they've reached the World Cup 5 times prior to 2022 and passed the group stage 4 times. For Euro, it's 8 times that they have reached the Cup. They passed the group stage only 4 times, but they did reach the semi-finals 3 of those 4 times. So they tend to make the best of it when they get there. Denmark is at a peak of form since 2016. So we talked about a lull from 2014. Well, we talked about a lull prior to 2016, missing 4 of 6 cups in that period. However, they have reached the last 3 tournaments, including this cup, and they even passed the group stage in the 2018 World Cup and 2020 Euro Cup. So they will want to keep that form going. You may recall that in the 2020 Euro Cup, Christian Eriksen worryingly collapsed on the field in their game against Finland. And that seemed to galvanize the team into a good performance. Or at first, they seemed shocked. And I think they lost that game against Finland or tied it. But it seemed to galvanize them into a tight squad. And they went on to finish in the semi-finals there in 2020. So Eriksen is now back, by the way. But a lot of the players who played in the 2020 Cup are still there. So it's a pretty tight squad. Let's move on to talk about their formations. And we start with the Euro Cup in 2020. I'll maybe add 2020 there, which was in the summer of 2021, confusingly. They started with a 4-3-3 formation. However, for all 5 games after that, they went with a 3-4-2-1 formation. And we're going to see that's kind of their preferred formation. So 3 central defenders across the box. 4 in the kind of the defensive midfield. So we'll see those outside midfielders there are usually the left and right backs pushing upfield. 2 in the attacking midfield. So we'll probably refer to those as left and right attacking midfielder, and 1 centre forward. They did change things up a bit in World Cup qualification. A couple of strange formations there in the 5-4-1 and the 4-1-4-1 in games 1 and 2. Those actually are quite similar, just a stopper instead of a 3-man central defense there, but still the single center forward. So a bit unusual. Then they seem to kind of go back to that 3-4-2-1. However, it looked more like a 3-2-2-2-1, if you will. So just kind of separated upfield. If you think about it, the 3-2-2-2-1 is pretty similar to the 3-4-2-1, just with the midfield kind of separated into defensive midfielders and wingers. Game 4 was a 4-3-3, and the rest were either the 3-2-2-2-1 or the 3-4-2-1, similar formations. So we can say the first 2 are a little unusual. The 4-3-3 we had seen before in Game 4, but 4 of the 7 games were basically the 3-4-2-1. They had a couple of friendlies after that World Cup qualification, and they actually, in terms of the squad, they tend for games 6 and 7 of World Cup qualifying, they had already secured first place, so they tended to be a bit more experimentative in those games. Those were against Faroe Islands and Scotland. However, in the friendlies that followed, they seemed to generally go with their top players. A bit of experimentation there, but the real experimentation seemed more really to be in the last 2 games of World Cup qualifying. And like most teams in Nations League, they seem to use it to kind of experiment with their squad. So the formations in the Nations League were again the 3-4-2-1. In 2 of the games, in games 1 and 4, slightly different in game 2 with a 3-4-1-2, so a central attacking midfielder and 2 forwards. That's the only time they used 2 forwards. And game 3 was a 4-2-3-1. So they have used 4 defenders a few times. But I wonder if actually the attacking midfielder in games 2 and 3 was because Christian Eriksen was back and that's his coded position. Anyway, once again, maybe if you think of Denmark as generally a three-man backline, 4 defensive midfielders with wingers, 2 attacking midfielders and 1 forward. Generally, that's the formation they seem to prefer. All right, let's go on and talk about the squad. We'll begin with the manager. And I'm actually going to begin with the manager in 2018 to give a little bit of history. So I'm really not sure how to say the name. Age Hareide. Age Hareide was the manager of the team in the 2018 World Cup. And I won't go into too much detail. He was their manager from 2016 to 2020, but that was before the Euro Cup that they got rid of him. And for the Euro Cup, they brought in Kasper Hjulmand. So he is their current manager, Kasper Hjulmand. And as I said, has been with Denmark since 2020. So he led them through the Euro Cup there. Actually, and 2020 was the year before the Euro Cup was played. I think I got a little confused there, thinking it was shortly before the Cup, but it wasn't. It was a year before the Cup, at least. He has basically coached clubs in Denmark, Nordsjælland and Lyngby. And actually doesn't have a lot of experience, but he did well in Euro 2020, which was his first tournament with any national team, Denmark being the only one he coached. And he is 28, 50 years old. All right, so it'll be Kasper Hjulmand leading them through the cup, because I doubt they will change that before we go. Let's move on to goalkeepers, and I'll start by just introducing the names. So we have Kasper Schmeichel as a definite candidate, and then we go all the way down to possible with Fredrik Ronno and Peter Vindal Jensen. And we have a possible but unlikely in Jesper Hansen. And we have 2 players who seem to be off the squad, Jonas Lossel and Daniel Iverson. Okay, so we'll go back to Kasper Schmeichel, and it's pretty easy to see why we have him as a definite candidate. He started all 13 of their games since the 2021 Euro Cup. And I'm going to say 2021 Euro Cup just because that's when it took place, and it's a bit confusing to say the 2020, even though that's its official name. Kasper Schmeichel has 86 caps for the national team, and he's been with them since 2012. And he is currently 36 years old. And he recently moved to Nice in France in 2022, but was with Leicester for a long time in England, including the goalkeeper behind their title-winning season from 2011 to 2022. And he played for other teams in England, Leeds United, Notts County, Manchester City, actually, from 2005 to 2009, although he was loaned out to quite a few clubs during that period. So Kasper Schmeichel, his first tournament was the 2012 Euro Cup. He was on the roster, but he didn't see any action. Stefan Andersen was the starting goalkeeper there. But for the World Cup 2018, which was Denmark's next tournament, he started and finished all 4 games. So he saved a penalty in extra time against Croatia there at 116 minutes, but they eventually lost that game on penalties. So made a good showing in the World Cup there in 2018 and also in Euro 2020, where they reached the semi-finals. So he also saved a penalty by Harry Kane in extra time of the semi-final against England, but also lost that game too. The next keeper we'll talk about is Frederick Rono. So we have him as just a possible candidate because he didn't start any of their 13 games. Well, no one did because Kasper Schmeichel started all of them. So we look at how much they were used, called up on the bench. And Frederick Rono was called up for 9 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. And he has been with the team since 2000. Excuse me. So he's with Union Berlin in Germany since 2021 and played for Eintracht Frankfurt before that from 2018 to 2021. He did a bit of a loan spell with Schalke there. And prior to that, he was in Denmark with Brøndby and a couple of other clubs. So he was on the roster for the 2018 World Cup. That was his first tournament. And again on the roster for the Euro 2020. Kasper Schmeichel starting both of those tournaments. And so a possible candidate here. Peter Vindal Jensen is also a possible candidate. Peter Vindal Jensen first appeared on the bench in November 2021. He didn't start any of the remaining 8 games to June, but he was on the bench for 6 of them. So he's been with the team since 2020. He actually did get 1 cap there at the beginning, and he is quite young at 23 years old, and he plays for AZ Alkmaar in the Netherlands since 2021. So a possible candidate there. Next, we have possible but unlikely Jesper Hansen. He didn't start any of their games since the Euro Cup, but he was on the bench for 4. However, he was not selected for 9 matches, including the last 8. So Jesper Hansen has not been selected for any tournaments. He was actually on the preliminary squad for the 2018 World Cup, but he didn't make the final cut. And I've kind of jumped ahead because I didn't give the bio information. He's actually a bit of an interesting case because he has 2 caps for the team, but they were way back in 2012 and 13. So he has been called up to the bench since then, but hasn't earned a cap since 2013, and he is older than Schmeichel at 37 years old. He plays for AGF Aarhus in Denmark since 2021. All right, and Jonas Lossell, we have him seemingly off the team now. He last appeared for the national team on the bench in September 2021, so shortly after the Euro Cup there. So he was on the team from 2016 to 2020, but he only earned 1 cap, and now he is 33 years old. He plays for Midtjylland in Denmark since 2021, but he was loaned to Brentford in England in 2022. So we're going to see a lot of Danish players kind of gathering at Brentford in England. Jonas Lossell was with Everton in England before that and loaned to a few teams. He also played for Mainz in Germany and Greencamp in France. So he's been around a little bit. He's also kind of been around the squad because he was a backup keeper in the 2020 Euro Cup and in the 2018 World Cup, although he didn't see action in either of those tournaments. So Jonas Lossell seemed to be kind of the backup keeper, but now seems to have dropped off the team. Okay, and finally Daniel Iverson. Daniel Iverson earned his first 2 caps on the bench in September 2019, but then disappeared from the scene for 2.5 years, but returned in March 2022. He didn't start any of their remaining 6 games, but he was on the bench for all 6 matches since March 2022. So he plays for Leicester in England. So those are the candidates that we're looking at. And I'll just tell you the situation with the goalkeeper. Well, it's quite simple. It's Kasper Schmeichel all the time. But we're going to talk about whether that's a bit of an issue because maybe he's starting too much and the others, the backup keepers, aren't getting enough kind of experience. So Schmeichel even played in the 2 friendlies in March where they had an opportunity to try out new keepers, or those last 2 World Cup qualifying games where they had already secured passage. Okay, let's move on now to central defenders. And I'll just clean up the graphics for the YouTube people a little bit here. So central defenders, will go through the candidates first. And we have a definite candidate in Andreas Christensen. 2 likely candidates in Yannick Vestergaard and Joachim Andersen. And then possible candidates in Simon Kjær. I think Danish fans will be surprised that I'm putting him as a possible candidate, but from an objective point of view, it's kind of uncertain because he's an injury risk. We have Victor Nelson and Andreas Maxo, and seemingly off the team, Matthias Jorgensen, sometimes called Zanka, his nickname. Zanka. Let's go back to the top with Andreas Christensen. So a bit of rotation here in central defense. So Andreas Christensen started 9 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and wasn't selected for 4 others. And he has been with the squad since 2015, the national team, and has 58 caps and 1 goal. He is currently 26 years old. He recently moved to Barcelona in Spain in 2022, but was with Chelsea in England for a long time before that, since 2014. Early in that spell with Chelsea, he was loaned to Borussia Mönchengladbach from 2015 to 17, but he actually was with the Chelsea Youth Club from 2012 to 14, having moved over from the Brøndby Youth Club. So Andreas Christensen's first tournament was the 2018 World Cup, and he was a starter right away there. And he was also a starter in 2020 in the Euro Cup, starting all 6 games there. But he did sub out injured in the last game. Okay, so he actually scored a tremendous goal in that tournament, an incredible blast from well outside the box in their win over Russia. Okay, Yannick Vestergaard is a likely candidate. He started 6 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 1 besides and on the bench for 3. So just the first 3 matches after the Euro Cup, he wasn't selected for. But then he was a permanent candidate or a permanent call-up after that. Yannick Vestergaard got his first cap in 2013 and now has 36 caps and 2 goals, and he's 30 years old. And he plays for Leicester in England, just like goalkeeper Kasper Schmeichel did. Kasper Schmeichel has moved on, of course, but since 2021. So he just basically joined the team shortly before Kasper Schmeichel left. Vestergaard was with Southampton in England before that from 2018 to 21, and with Borussia Mönchengladbach and Werder Bremen and Hoffenheim, all clubs in Germany. So after kind of graduating from the Brøndby Youth Club, he immediately moved to Germany. Vestergaard was on the squad for the 2018 World Cup, but he was just on the bench there and didn't see any action. In Euro 2020, he subbed into Game 1 and then gained a starting position for the remaining 5 games. So he actually did give away a soft penalty to Russia in Game 3 there. But gained a starting position. But we're kind of going to see that he's a bit on the outside edge. He gained that starting position, I believe it was due to an injury. But we'll kind of see he's on the edge. He hasn't really firmly established himself as a starter, but we consider him likely to reach the squad, whether he's on the bench or starting. Next is Joachim Andersen, also a likely candidate. He started 8 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1. So like Vestergaard, he wasn't called up for 3 games, and I probably should have done him first because I think he's a bit more likely to start than Vestergaard is. He has been on the team, Joachim Andersen, since 2019, so a relative newcomer, and has 19 caps in that time. He's 26 years old and plays for Crystal Palace in England since 2021. He was with Lyon before that, from 2019 to 21, but he was loaned to Fulham in England in the second half of his time with Lyon. And he also was in various other countries, Sampdoria in Italy and Twente in the Netherlands, and played for a couple of clubs in Denmark in his youth, for his youth time. Okay, so that is Joachim Andersen, a likely candidate. And now we'll move on to Simon Kjær. So he's a big name for Netherlands. For Denmark. He's the captain of the team. So I really do think he will be on the squad if he is fit. But he was injured for the March friendlies, and then he was absent after that, possibly recovering from whatever injury that was. And I checked a bit more recently. He wasn't playing for his club in early June either. So he missed those June games for club and country. But I do kind of think he's recovered over the summer. So it's hard to imagine that he wouldn't return. However, he has just played 6 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 2. He was only listed, on the bench for 1. He was only listed as injured for 2, but as I say, he wasn't selected for the last 4 matches, possibly because of that injury. His first tournament he has been with Denmark since 2009 and has 121 caps and 5 goals and is 33 years old. And he plays for AC Milan in Italy since 2020. He was with Sevilla in Spain before that, but loaned out to AC Milan and to Atalanta before that. He also played for Fenerbahce in Turkey and Lille in France and Wolfsburg in Germany. So he's been all over Europe. His first tournament was the 2010 World Cup, where he started and finished games 1 and 2, but he was suspended on yellow cards for game 3 there. He started and finished in the 2012 Euro Cup also, and he was captain of the team by the time the World Cup 2018 came around. Between 2012 and 18, they didn't reach tournaments. So he was a captain and starter both in the 2018 World Cup and 2020 Euro Cup there. So Simon Kjær, I have him as a possible candidate here, but in my mind, he's a definite if he is fit. Next, we have Victor Nelson as a possible candidate, and he returned after a 10-month absence in September 2021 to start 4 of their remaining 13 games, and we're going up to June 2022 on our assessment here. He was also subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 4, so just 4 games that he wasn't selected for, and he has been with Denmark since 2020 and has 7 caps. He's quite young at 24 years old, and he plays for Galatasaray in Turkey, was with Copenhagen in Denmark before that. So he was around the time of the Euro 2020, but he wasn't selected for that squad. So this would be his first tournament if he makes it. And by the way, for YouTube watchers, the light grey, the fact that their name is in light grey indicates that they haven't played in a tournament. A kind of a darker grey means they're retired, and black means that they've played in a tournament before. All right, and the final possible candidate is Andreas Maxo. So he didn't start any of their games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was subbed in for one and on the bench for five. However, he wasn't selected for the last four matches there. So he has been with the team since 2020 and has two caps and is 28 years old, so a bit of a late joiner there. He plays for Brøndby in Denmark. He also was not selected for the 2020 Euro Cup, so doesn't have any tournament experience. And perhaps I should have started with Matthias Jorgensen, because I wanted to kind of explain that he was a staple in defense. Kind of a commonly used defender, but he last appeared for the national team in the 2021 Euro Cup. So I won't go into a lot of detail on him. He actually is still playing at the club level for Brentford in England, the team where so many Danish players are playing. And he was actually not a kind of consistent starter for Denmark. He actually subbed into the World Cup in 2018 and then gained a starting position. And he was on the roster for 2022 Euro, but didn't actually start any games. So kind of on and off the team. But he has 35 caps and kind of played a lot in the qualifiers more than in the actual tournaments. So Matthias Jorgensen, seemingly off the team at 32 years old. Okay, well, we'll talk about the situation with central defenders. It's been a little bit complex, so bear with me here. But we have in the Euro Cup, Simon Kjær and Andreas Christensen were the two-man central defense of game one. If you remember, they started with a 4-3-3, but Vestergaard was added to make it a three-man backline for the rest of the tournament. So Simon Kjær, Andreas Christensen, and Yannick Vestergaard. Anderson came in to replace Vestergaard, Joachim Andersen, for the in the first half of World Cup qualifying, with Nelson and right back Jan Stryger Larsen both given a single tryout in that three-man defence. But it returned to the regular Kjær, Christensen and Vestergaard for two of the last three games of World Cup qualifying. So simplifying things a bit, basically Kjær and Christensen disappeared in March 22 for the friendlies, and it was primarily Vestergaard and Anderson. Then Christensen returned to replace Vestergaard for the last two Nations League games. So in the period from March to June, Nelson got two starts, and Jan Stryger Larsen and left back Boyleson got one start. So they seem to be kind of experimenting a bit, but keep in mind that Simon Kjær was injured for these Nations League games. So in short, we can consider it a rotation of Christensen, Joachim Andersen and Vestergaard, with other players kind of stepping in from time to time. And Simon Kjær a bit up in the air right now, but I guess he will probably return before the World Cup. And if he does, I think it would be Yannick Vestergaard that would lose kind of his starting position in favor of Kjær. So I consider the three main defenders there: Christensen, Joachim Andersen, and Simon Kjær. That was a bit complicated. The other positions are a bit simpler than that. And let's move on to talk about left backs. And we're actually going to begin with Joachim Mail. But you'll see here, I've kind of highlighted it, that he's actually coded as a right back, but I've kind of recoded him as a left back because that's where he always seems to play for Denmark. So perhaps for his club, he's on the right, but for Denmark, he's very consistently been on the left. So I have him here. He is a definite candidate. Well, Joachim Mile. I'm not dead sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. We also have a possible candidate and a player I mentioned who showed up in that three-man central defence one time, Nikolai Boyleson. We have him as a possible candidate, and we have Mads Valentine, or sometimes called Mads Pedersen. The sources seem a bit torn on that, so I've just called him Mads Valentine Pedersen, and he is possible but unlikely. Okay, let's take a look at these three players. So Joachim Male has been with Denmark since 2020, but he kind of took a starting position immediately and has 31 caps in that time and 9 goals. He's just 25 years old, but seems pretty entrenched in the team. Here, he started 12 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for the one other. And he is he plays for Atlanta in Italy, and he played in Genk in Belgium and Aalborg in Denmark before that. So his first tournament was the Euro 2020, but he was a starter and he finished all games playing in left defense for all of those games. And played very well in that tournament, I must say. So, as I say, kind of entrenched in the team. Nikolai Boyleson has not managed to budge him out of the left back position, but as we saw, he did get one start after as a left central defender in a three-man defense. So Nikolai Boyleson returned after a 12-month absence in June 2022 to start one of their remaining 4 games there. And he was on the bench for 2 and not selected for one of those 4 games. So he's been with the team actually for a long time, since 2011. And he has 22 caps and 1 goal. And he's 30 years old. However, he's kind of been in and out of the team, as we'll see. He plays for Copenhagen in Denmark and also played for Ajax in the Netherlands. His first tournament, despite being on the team since 2011, was the Euro 2020 Cup. He was selected for the 35-man preliminary squad for the 2018 World Cup, but he didn't make the cut. They didn't make the cut to 28 players, let alone the final cut. For the Euro 2020, he was a substitute, but he did come in game 4, so did see a little field time there. And that's it. So we have him as a possible candidate because of his recent participation. But if he does make the squad, he will quite likely be on the bench. Finally, we have Mads Valentine Pedersen. And so, including his first appearance on the bench in March 2022, he didn't start any of their remaining 5 games, but he was on the bench for one of these and not selected for the last 4 matches. So actually, just kind of popped up for one game in March there and wasn't called back. So Mads Valentine Pedersen, a real outside chance of making it. He doesn't have any caps for Denmark, and he plays for Augsburg in Germany and is 26 years old. So those are the 3 players as left backs. And we'll just describe the position here. So basically, it's always Joachim Male playing as a left back. But when it's a 3-man central defense, he generally moves up and plays as a left winger. So because they've used that formation more, he's played as a left winger more. The right back, Jens Stryger Larsen, played the position once in World Cup qualifications. So actually, it seems that if Male is injured or unavailable, it's not Boyleson who moves into the position, but an out of position player. So Interestingly, Jens Stryger Larsson was the left back in the 2018 World Cup, but now we're going to describe him as a right back because that's where he's been playing in the period that we're talking about. So that moves us on to right backs, and no surprise that Jens Stryger Larsson is there. However, he is not the top candidate there because we have Rasmus Christensen as a definite, and we have Daniel Wass as a likely, and Jens Stryger Larsson also as a likely. So again, one of these, probably Jens Stryger Larsson, is really the backup for the left back position also. As a possible candidate, we also have Alexander Baa, and seemingly off the team is Henrik Dalsgaard. So maybe I should talk about him first, because it's more of a historical figure. Henrik Dalsgaard held the right back position in the 2018 World Cup. However, he last appeared for the national team in November 2020. So Henrik Dalsgaard seemingly off the team and not selected for the 2020 Euro Cup. So basically the position opened up, and we will see who took it in the 2020 Euro Cup shortly here. It wasn't Rasmus Christensen, even though he's a definite candidate. He started 5 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 4. So just one match that he wasn't selected for. So we're not claiming Rasmus Christensen will be the starter. In fact, he probably won't. But the definite here means that he seems certain to make the squad for the World Cup. He's been with Denmark since 2021 and has 8 caps and is 25 years old. And Rasmus Christensen plays for Leeds United in England. That's a recent move in 2022. He played for Red Bull Salzburg in Austria and with Ajax in the Netherlands before that. His youth teams were in Denmark. The more likely candidate to be the starter would be Daniel Wass, and he started 6 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was on the bench for 2, but he was injured for 2 and not selected for 1 also. So Daniel Wass has been with Denmark since 2011 and has 44 caps and 1 goal, and is getting up there in age at 33 years old. He recently moved back to Brøndby in Denmark in 2022, but he had been with some big clubs in Spain before that, Atletico Madrid in 2022 and Valencia, both of those in Spain. Valencia from 2018 to 22. And he also played for Benfica in Portugal in 2011 and 12. So he has done well, but we do see he's 33 years old, so kind of moving into his retirement years and going back to Denmark for those years, it seems. So he was on the Euro Cup squad in 2012, but just as a substitute. He didn't see any action. However, he was not selected for the World Cup squad in 2018. He was on the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut there. And in the Euro 2020, he started games 1, 2, and 3, but he got injured for game 4 and was just used as a substitute after that. Okay, so Daniel Wass, but he has been playing in that position quite a bit since. So we have him as a likely candidate to make the team and possibly a starter. But his competition there is Jens Stryger Larsson. So Jens Stryger Larsson, he only started 2 of the 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 3. However, there were 3 matches that he wasn't selected for. That's why I have Daniel Wass and Rasmus Christensen ahead of him, because they're being called up more. Jens Stryger Larsson started for playing for Denmark in 2016 and has 49 caps and 3 goals. So we saw that he was a starter in the World Cup, but he was a starter as a left back there. But wait, before I talk about his tournament history, I should go back and finish his bio here. So he plays for Trabzonspor in Turkey since 2022 and was with Udinese in Italy before that, and Austria Vienna in Austria from 2014 to 17. Prior to that, he was in Denmark. So, as I said, a starter in the 2018 World Cup, but as a left back. By the time Euro 2020 came around, he wasn't a starter. He was subbed into the group stage games, but then he gained a starting position for the final, for the quarterfinal onward, gained a starting position as the right back there. So Jens Stryger Larsson, a likely candidate to make the squad, but you might be seeing now that the starting position is kind of up in the air. We move on to possible candidate Alexander Baugh. So he returned after a 12-month absence in November 2021 and started one of their remaining 7 games to June 2022, and also subbed in for one and was on the bench for one. However, he was not selected for the last 4 matches, so perhaps this World Cup will elude him because we have a lot of candidates here. He's been with the team then since 2020 and has 4 caps and 1 goal and is 25 years old. He does play for Benfica in Portugal, which is a good club affiliation, and a step up, I would say, from Slavia Prague in the Czech Republic. And prior to that, he was with a variety of clubs in Denmark. So Alexander Baugh, I'm thinking possibly one more for the future. Okay, and we talked about Heinrich Dalsgaard. He's off the team now. But he was the starter in the, I don't know if we did talk about him actually. I'll just make it quick. He held the position in the 2018 World Cup, so it opened up after that. So let's talk about the right back position. And if you think about the 3-4-2-1 formation, then the position of right back doesn't exist a lot of the times, only when there's a four at the back. Which doesn't happen often. So the position doesn't exist with a 3-man defense. But as on the left side, the right back usually moves up to a right winger position. So it was Daniel Wass in the first 3 games of the Euro Cup. But as we saw, Jens Stryger Larsson took the position for the last 3 games of Euro 2020. Daniel Wass, though, was held the position in most of the World Cup qualifying games. But when he wasn't there, it seemed to be Rasmus Christensen who got the start. So Wass and Christensen each had 2 games in the Nations League games there in June. So it almost looks like Jens Stryger Larsson is drifting off the team. But he has been on the bench quite regularly, so maybe just drifting off as a starter there. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the defenders. And we're going to move on to talk about the midfielders. We're going to put defensive midfielders and central midfielders together, since those positions often overlap. So we'll start with defensive midfielders and name the candidate. So we only have a possible candidate here in Christian Norgard and in Morten Hulman, and a possible but unlikely candidate in Jens Johnson. So let's go back to Christian Norgard. He started 5 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 3 and not selected for 5 others, including the last 4 matches there in June. So Christian Norgard got his first cap in 2020 and has 17 caps and 1 goal. He's 28 years old. And he's one of several players who play for Brentford in England. He's been with them since 2019. He moved over from Fiorentina in Italy, where he played in 2018 and 19, and was with Brøndby in Denmark before that. He also played for Hamburg in Germany towards the beginning of his career. He was selected for the 2020 Euro Cup, but was just a sub, although he did sub into most of those games. And yeah, that was his first tournament there. So Christian Norgard, a possible candidate. Morgan Hjulmand actually got his first and only appearance as a substitute in June 2022. So when it's recent like that, it's always hard to tell whether they're, what their chances are of making the team. He doesn't have any caps for for Denmark. That's the second time I did that. Sorry, Danish fans. He is 23 years old and plays for Lecce in Italy since 2021. So an outside candidate there too. But sometimes these new candidates do make it onto the squad if their form is good. Jens Johnson, he started one of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for one other, but not selected for 11 of those matches, including the last 6. So a bit of an outside chance of making the squad. Jens Johnson got his first cap in 2020 and has 5 caps for the national team, 28 years old, so a bit of a late joiner to the national side there. He plays for AEK Athens in Greece. That was a recent move in 2022 from Cadiz in Spain, where he played for a couple of years. So Jens Johnson, possible but unlikely. So let's continue on with central midfielders before we summarize the position. And it's really central midfielders who start more often. Thomas Delaney we have as a definite candidate. And Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, also a definite candidate. We have Matthias Jensen as a likely candidate, and Philip Billing as a possible. Kasper Nielsen is possible but unlikely. And then 2 players who seem to be off the squad, Anders Christensen and Jens Stage, or I'm not sure how that's pronounced, so I'll just say Stage, but I'll try to figure it out. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of these central midfielders with Thomas Delaney. So he started 6 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1. And he was injured for 1 and not selected for 2. So Thomas Delaney has been with Denmark since 2013 and has 71 caps and 7 goals. So a real veteran there, the 31-year-old. He plays for Sevilla in Spain since 2021 and was with Borussia Dortmund since from 2018 to 21, Werder Bremen and Copenhagen before that. He, according to my source, started with the Copenhagen youth team at just 2 years old. I'm not quite sure how that happens. He's actually eligible. He was eligible to play for the USA through his grandparents. In terms of tournament history, Thomas Delaney's first tournament, despite being on the squad since 2013, they didn't qualify for any tournaments until the 2018 World Cup. So he was a starter there, started all 4 games there. He assisted a goal just 1 minute into that game against Croatia. In the 2020 Euro Cup, he started all 6 games. So we probably see him as a starter here as well. So Thomas Delaney, a definite candidate to make the squad. Not so definite to be a starter, but a good chance of it. But we'll talk about that when we summarize the position. Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, Started 9 of the 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, or perhaps it's 10, sorry. And he subbed in for 1 and was not selected for 2 others. So I should have actually put him ahead of Thomas Delaney there, because he is that much more likely. He's been with Denmark, Pierre-Emil Højbjerg, since 2014, and he has 16 caps and 5 goals, and is 27 years old. So he plays for Tottenham in England. He moved there in 2020, having been with Southampton in England before that from 2016 to 20. And he was also with Bayern Munich in Germany from 2013 to 16, but loaned out to a couple of clubs there, Schalke and Augsburg there. So he actually was not selected for the 2018 World Cup. He was on the preliminary roster but didn't make the final cut. But he was on the squad as a starter for the 2020 Euro Cup, starting and actually finishing all games there too. He missed a penalty in that game to Finland. That was a pretty eventful game against Finland. And he was named to the team of the tournament for the 2020 Euro Cup, and he's doing very well in the English League too. Pierre-Emil Højbjerg, a definite candidate to make the squad. A likely candidate is Mathias Jensen. So he started 3 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. And besides that, was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 3. So just 3 matches that he wasn't called up for. And Mathias Jensen has been with Denmark since 2020. And he has 20 caps and 1 goal. And is 26 years old. So another of those playing for Brentford in England since 2019. And he was with Celta de Vigo in Spain before that, and in Denmark prior to that. So he too was selected for the 2018 World Cup squad, despite not having any caps at that point. But he selected for the preliminary squad, but didn't make the cut to 28 players. And in 2020, he was a sub, but he did sub into all 6 games in that tournament. And Mathias Jensen, a likely candidate to make the squad. A possible candidate is Philip Billing. Philip Billing returned actually after a 17-month absence in March 2022 and didn't start any of the remaining 6 games, but he was on the bench for 4 of those games. He has been with Denmark. His first cap was in 2020, and he has 3 caps for them and is 26 years old, and he plays for Bournemouth in England. So Philip Billing, a possible candidate. Kasper Nielsen is possible but unlikely. He got his first appearance on the bench in March 2022, but didn't start any of the remaining 5 games up until June 2022. But he was on the bench for 1 of those, the first of those in March, but then not selected after that. So he kind of came and went quickly. The 28-year-old has still to earn his first cap for Denmark. He plays for Club Brugge in Belgium. Anders Christiansen last appeared for the national team in September 2021, so shortly after the Euro Cup. But not since then. He had been with the team from 2013 to 21. But only earned 6 caps in that time. So he was actually selected for the 2020 Euro Cup, but he was not only not chosen to play on the field, but wasn't even on the bench for any of those 6 games. I'm not really sure what happened there, but very much on the outskirts of the team and hasn't played since September 2021. Jans Stage, or I'd just be guessing at the name. pronunciation if it's not stage. He got his first and only appearance in November 2021, so kind of came and went quickly. He plays for Werder Bremen in Germany since 2022, so he's 26 years old. So we may see him down the road, but he doesn't look like he has much of a chance of making this tournament. Okay, that is defensive and central midfielders. So now I'll just kind of describe how this role has gone. As we saw in the formations, it's usually 2 central midfielders, but sometimes just 1. And it was Pierre-Emile Højbjerg and Thomas Delaney throughout the Euro Cup. And then mostly it was Højbjerg and Delaney throughout World Cup qualifying. However, Christian Norgård did come in for 2 games. One of them is in that 4-1-4-1 formation. So he came in as a stopper. And other players have played in the central midfielder too. Attacking midfielder Lindstrom, who we'll meet later. Right defender Daniel Wass, has also moved into the central midfielder. And Jens Johnson was used. Was experimented with, I guess, in that position in those last 2 games of World Cup qualifying after they'd already secured their qualification. In June, with the Nations League games, it was Højbjerg and Delaney twice. But in the 2 other games, Jens Johnson replaced Delaney a couple of times. So maybe I should have him as a bit higher than possible, but unlikely. But there we have it. So generally, we're looking at Thomas Delaney and Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, and Christian Norgård seems to come in when they're looking for a bit more of a defensive midfielder there. And sorry, I think I said it was Jens Johnson who came in, but actually I think it was really Matthias Johnson who played those last 2 Nations League games in central defence. Okay, now we move on to left midfielders, but we actually don't have any coded as a left midfielder on the squad. So I'll talk a little bit about the position. And the left midfielder role is played by a central midfielder when it exists. But if you think about it in a 4-2-3-1, it's kind of, in a 3-4-2-1, it's kind of 2 central midfielders with 2 wingers. So not really placed for a left midfielder. But in a 4-3-3, where they do have a left and a right midfielder, the position does sometimes exist. So when it was used, Thomas Delaney usually played as the left midfielder, although Pierre-Emile Højbjerg switched over 1 time to play in that position. And as far as right midfielders go, it's pretty much the same on the other side. We do have 1 player coded as a right midfielder, but he seems to be off the squad. I will just briefly introduce him, but I'll finish this position because it's the same on the right and left side. So Pierre-Emile Højbjerg is the logical choice, the central midfielder moving over to play on the right when it's a 4-3-3. But actually, Højbjerg only played it 1 of the 3 times, and it was actually attacking midfielder Christian Eriksen playing it the other 2 times. So sometimes Eriksen moving back in the field a little bit to play as a right midfielder. Okay, the player we do have as coded seems to be off the squad. It's Lasse Schön. So Lasse Schön last appeared for the national team in March 2021. He's actually been with the team for a long time, from 2009 to 2021 and had 53 caps and 3 goals in that time. But he is 36 years old, so probably aged out, even though he is still playing at the club level for NEC Nijmegen in the Netherlands. But he was part of the 2012 Euro Cup and the 2018 Cup, but he was just a substitute in both of those, so never kind of made it onto the squad as far as tournaments go, but 51 caps suggest he was involved in qualifiers. All right, let's move on to the left wing and right wing position. And surprisingly, they don't have anyone in these positions either. So I'll just describe the positions. And so basically, with the 3-4-1-2, the winger position is a bit more of a defensive role than an attacking role. So it's common in the formation they use, the 4-2-3-1 or the 3-4-2-1 or the 3-2-2-2-1 formation. So as we saw, it's usually the left defender who moves upfield to play. So that will be Joachim Mail moving up to play as a left winger. And as far as players who are designated as left wingers, we're going to deal with those as left attacking midfielders or even left forwards, because that's the role they play on the attacking end. So on the right side, usually it is one of the whoever's playing right defense moving up, usually Daniel Wass or sometimes Stryger Larsson in and they were the ones who played it in the cup. But Rasmus Christiansen also played it in the last game of World Cup qualifying. So Wass and Christiansen in World Cup qualifying. As far as left wingers go, we'll take a look at those as attacking players shortly here. So we did see Alexander Barr step into this right winger position one time. That was during one of the friendlies. But in the recent Nations League games, it was back to Daniel Wass and Rasmus Christiansen kind of sharing the role. Okay, but for left wingers, we do have a couple of candidates. But as I said, we're going to view them more as left attacking midfielders or left forwards here, and we'll do the same on the right side a bit later. So the candidates we have here are Mikael Damsgaard, and we consider him a definite candidate. Just let me fix up the graphics here a little bit. Mikael Damsgaard as a definite candidate, and Yusuf Poulsen also as a definite candidate, although he is an injury risk, which we'll talk about later. We also have designated as a left winger, but actually playing when he does in a left attacking midfield role, is Jacob Brun Larsen. We have him as a possible candidate, as well as Mohamed Daramy, a possible candidate. And again, think of this as a kind of left attacking midfielder role. So going back to the beginning, Mikael Damsgaard started 5 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 2. And the 4 games that he wasn't called up for, he was injured. But he is over that injury now. So Mikael Damsgaard has been with the team since 2020 and has 18 caps and 4 goals. And he's very young, 22 years old, and another who plays for Brentford in England. A recent signing for them in 2022. He played for Sampdoria in Italy before that, and Nordsjælland in Denmark, was his first club and his youth club, actually. Mikael Damsgaard was selected for the Euro 2020, and he was on the bench for game one, but he gained a starting position for all 5 remaining games after that, and did well in the cup. He got a goal on a fabulous free kick from 30 yards out, and that was against England. So at 30-minute mark against England. And Mikael Damsgaard, we consider, despite his youth, a definite candidate for this squad. Yusuf Poulsen, we would also consider a definite candidate. He started 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 1. However, he was injured for 2 games, including the last match in June. So we'll have to kind of check into his injury situation, which we'll do at the end. Yusuf Poulsen has been with the team for quite a while, since 2013, and he has 68 caps and 11 goals and is 28 years old. So he's been with Leipzig in Germany since 2013, so coming up on 10 years with them, and he played for Lyngby in Denmark before that. That was his youth club too. So he was not involved in the 2012 Euro Cup. That was before his time. And then the next tournament after that was the 2018 World Cup. So he started and finished all 4 games there, except for game 3. He was suspended for having accumulated 2 yellow cards there for game 3. For the Euro Cup in 2020, he also started games 1, 2, and 3, but then he lost his starting position after being injured for game 4. So he just came in as a substitute. Not a serious injury there, but enough to cost him his starting position. So Yusuf Poulsen, and we'll talk about his injury, the current state of his injury when we get to the end of the podcast here. Jacob Brun-Larsen is a possible candidate. He returned after a 12-month absence in September 2021 and started 2 of their remaining 13 games and was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 4. However, he wasn't selected for the last 4 matches, the Nations League games in June. Jacob Brun-Larsen has been with Denmark since 2019, but only 6 caps and 1 goal in that time. He's still young, though, at 24 years old. He played for Hoffenheim in Germany since 2020, but he was loaned out to Anderlecht in Belgium in 2021. Prior to that, he was with Borussia Dortmund in Germany, and he actually came up through their youth club, moving from the Lyngby Youth Club to Borussia Dortmund. So he hasn't played in any tournaments, even though he was around the time of the 2020 Euro Cup. He wasn't selected, but seems to be called up more often now, although doesn't get many starts. Mohamed Daramy is got his first cap in September 2021 and started 2 of their remaining 13 games to June 2022. And he was also subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2. And then when he wasn't with the national team, he was with the under-21 national team. So it's hard to say if he would have been called up to the senior team. So he has been with the team since 2021 and has 4 caps and no goals. And he's just 20 years old, playing for Ajax in the Netherlands since 2021. But he was loaned to Copenhagen in Denmark recently in 2022. So a possible candidate there in Mohamed Daramy. And I'll just talk about the position here. So again, think of it as a left attacking midfielder or a left forward role in a 4-3-3 formation. And in the Euro Cup, it was Mikael Damsgaard, and actually the forward Martin Braithwaite sometimes took the position of the left attacking midfielder, and actually Damsgaard and Braithwaite just sometimes switched sides. So it was Damsgaard throughout World Cup qualification, but in the last two games where they experimented a bit after they had secured qualification, Daramy and Brun Larsen both got a chance in that position. In the friendlies, it was Yusuf Poulsen, and attacking midfielder Lindstrom taking the position. And then in Nations League, it was kind of all over the place with Christian Eriksen, Damsgaard, and Jonas Wind each taking the position one time, and the other time the position didn't exist. So it seems to be Mikkel Damsgaard in the position, but lately they've been trying a lot of different players in that position. So that's the left attacking midfielder role. Let's move on to the basically the right attacking midfielder role, which is also played by wingers, and we have Andreas Skov Olsen as a definite candidate. And then we have Robert Skov as a possible candidate, and Anders Dreyer as seemingly off the squad. So let's go back to Andreas Skov Olsen, who is really holding down the position. He started 10 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for the other three, so always selected. He has his first cap with Denmark in 2020, and has 23 caps and 8 goals in that time. So he's really doing well, and just 23 years old. So he plays for Club Bruges, or perhaps Club Brugge in Belgium, since 2022, and was with Bologna in Italy before that from 2019. And he moved to Italy from Nordsjælland in Denmark. That was also his youth club. So Andreas Skov Olsen was selected for the 2021 for the 2020 Euro Cup, but he was just subbed in to games 1 and 2 in that tournament. But he's obviously made big inroads since then. In 2022 World Cup qualifying, he scored 5 of their 30 goals and was their co-top scorer. So he's been holding down the position basically since immediately after the Euro Cup there in 2020. Robert Skov started none of their games actually since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 3, and injured for a couple of those games as well. So Robert Skov has been with Denmark since 2019 and has 11 caps and 5 goals, so that's a good percentage, but doesn't actually see much action. And he is 26 years old and plays for Hoffenheim in Germany, and was with Copenhagen in Denmark before that. So he was also selected for the 2020 Euro Cup, but he was on the bench there, actually not even on the bench for games 1 and 2, but on the bench after that, but didn't see any field time. So Robert Skov, a possible candidate. Finally, we have Anders Dreyer. So Anders Dreyer made just 1 appearance as a substitute in 2 games in November 2021, but he left as quickly as he came. So he's just 24 years old, so possibly will make it back. Interestingly, actually, he was playing for Rubin Kazan in Russia from 2021, but because of the political problems there, he was loaned to Midfield in Denmark, and is now moved over to Midfield in Denmark. That's the team he was with before he joined Rubin Kazan. So 3 candidates there. And I'll just summarize the position, although this is fairly simply. It's Martin Braithwaite actually plays the position in the Euro Cup, but Poulsen also played as a right forward, and we saw that Braithwaite and Damsgaard sometimes switched sides, so Damsgaard also played on it. However, after the Euro Cup, Skov Olsen increasingly moved into the position in World Cup qualifying, and it was Skov Olsen in the friendlies as well, although Lindstrom took the position one time, and Skov Olsen took the position back for the Nations League game, so he pretty much owns that position of right attacking midfielder there. Okay, well, that is it for the midfield, and we move on to forwards because we add attacking midfielders as part of the forwards discussion. So for attacking midfielders, we have Christian Eriksen as a definite candidate, having recovered from the frightening incident in the Euro Cup there in the summer of 2021. And we also have Jesper Lindstrom, a possible candidate, coded as an attacking midfielder, and Pione Sisto as a possible but unlikely candidate. So we'll come back to him, but we'll start by talking about Christian Eriksen, probably their biggest name right now. He's been with Denmark since 2010, and he has 117 caps and 39 goals, so a pretty high percentage there. And he is 30 years old now. He recently moved from that kind of gathering of Denmark players at Brentford. He only played with them in 2022, kind of on his return from that heart trouble that he had in the Euro Cup. Played for Brentford until the end of last season, but was signed by Manchester United since 2022. And prior to that, he was with Inter Milan in Italy and with Tottenham in England for a long time from 2013 to 20. He also played for Ajax in Netherlands before that. So, just to clarify his situation, he returned after a 9-month absence after the Euro Cup. So he returned in March 2022, and he started 4 of their remaining 6 games and subbed in for 2 others. So he seems fully recovered from that now. And his first tournament was actually the World Cup in 2010, where he was just a substitute, subbed into a couple of games there. And so he was a starter in Euro 2012 and in their following tournament, the 2018 World Cup. And we saw in Euro 2020, he was a starter there in game 1 until that shocking heart attack, which of course ended his tournament. And he was out of action for 9 months there. But Christian Eriksen back and considered a definite candidate here. Jesper Lindstrom started 3 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed into 1 and on the bench for 2. And he was with the under-23 team for a few of those matches because he's just 22 years old. But he wasn't selected for the last 4 matches. So that makes him a possible candidate here. Since 2020, he's got 6 caps and 1 goal for the national team, and he plays for Eintracht Frankfurt in Germany since 2021, a team that's doing quite well. Prior to that, he was with Brøndby in Denmark, and even though he got his first cap in 2020, he wasn't selected for the Euro Cup, so this would be his first tournament if he makes the team, which we consider a possibility. Finally, Pione Sisto has not started any of their games since the Euro Cup in 2021, but he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1. However, he seems to be drifting off the team because he wasn't selected for 11 matches, including the last 6. So Pione Sisto has 26 caps and 1 goal for Denmark, and is 27 years old, and plays for Midfield in Denmark since 2020, and was with Celta de Vigo in Spain from 2016 to 20. So he was part of the World Cup squad in 2018. He actually started the first 3 games there, but he lost his starting position after the group stage. And he wasn't selected for the 2020 Euro Cup either. So kind of on and off the team, but currently off the team. So we have him as a possible but unlikely candidate. All right, let's talk about the role of attacking midfielder. And basically, the formation does not often call for this role. So if you think about the 3-4-2-1, it tends to be outside attacking midfielders, and then the 4-3-3 is more of a central midfielder, so not much place for an attacking midfielder. So as a result, we see that Eriksson has not started as an attacking midfielder. Only once did he start when that position existed, but the other 2 times he's played as a more defensive central midfielder, and then once as, I believe it was a left attacking midfielder. So, but they may kind of go back to that position, because in the Nations League game, in Game 3 of the Nations League, they did have a 4-2-3-1. Which does allow for an attacking midfielder. So now that he's back, maybe they will use that formation a little bit more to suit his position. Okay, well, we don't have any secondary strikers. That would be quite similar to an attacking midfielder role. So we move on to their forwards. And among their forwards, we have actually Andreas Cornelius as a definite candidate. And we have Martin Braithwaite as a likely candidate. Jonas Wind also a likely candidate. However, Jonas Wind is an injury doubt, so we'll talk about that soon. We have Kasper Dolberg, to my surprise, as a possible candidate. And then we have 3 players who seem to be off the team. So Marcus Ingvardsson and Michael Uher, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, or Marcus Mikkel Ur, perhaps. And finally, Nikolai Jorgensen, who's a veteran. So I'll actually start with Nikolai Jorgensen just to set up the situation. He was the starting forward in the 2018 World Cup, starting forward, but he only started games 1 and 2 before he lost his starting position. But I must say, ever since then, they have been struggling. Well, I guess he was part of the struggle to find a forward, and they ultimately didn't go with him. He was on the Danish team from 2012 to 19 and had 41 caps, but only 9 goals in that time. So actually, he's still just 31 years old, but he hasn't appeared for the national team since June 2019, so well before the Euro 2020. So Nikolai Jorgensen, I guess, one of the forwards who hasn't worked out for them. And I got to say, like, their forwards have generally not been producing the number of goals which they probably need from a forward. And we'll look at that when we investigate their goal scoring situation. Andreas Cornelius we have as the definite candidate. Not a definite starter, though. He only started 3 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. However, we have him as definite to make the squad because he also subbed in for 6 and was on the bench for 2. and the only times he wasn't called up were the first 2 matches after the Euro 2021 where he was injured. So Andreas Cornelius has been with Denmark since 2012, and he has 43 caps and 13 goals. So not a bad percentage there. And he's 29 years old and plays for Copenhagen in Denmark. This is actually his third time with the club since 2022. Before that, he was with Trabzonspor in Turkey and Parma in Italy, and quite a few clubs, Cardiff in England, and sprinkling those international clubs by always seemingly returning to Copenhagen in between. So Andreas Cornelius was a sub in the World Cup 2018. However, he got a starting position for games 3 and 4 there, although he didn't score any of Denmark's goals. In Euro 2020, he was just a substitute, although he did sub into the first 4 games there, but also scored none of their goals in the finals there. So it doesn't seem like their solution as the centre forward, but we consider him a definite candidate to make the squad. Martin Braithwaite, we consider him more of a more of a right attacking midfielder. And he started one of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 3. Actually, he was injured for the first 7 of those games and not selected for 2 others. So injury and also Skov Olsen kind of taking over that attacking midfielder role has kept Braithwaite kind of on the bench there. But a little hard to tell because of that injury. We don't know if he would have been selected otherwise. But since 2013, he has been selected 62 times and has 10 goals and is 31 years old. And he's now with Espanyol in Spain since 2022, but he was with Barcelona from 2020 to 22. And he has played in England too for Middlesbrough and was loaned out to Bordeaux in France too, so played for a couple of clubs in France. So Martin Braithwaite. The first tournament for him was the 2018 World Cup, and he was subbed into the first 2 games and then gained a starting position for the following 2 games. And in 2020, he was the starter. He was a starter, again lining up as a left forward in game 1 and a left attacking midfielder in the games after that. I think sometimes he has played as the centre forward, but we'll get to that. So Martin Braithwaite, a likely candidate, although we see him more as a left attacking midfielder. Jonas Wind started 3 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 4, and there were 4 games he wasn't selected for. So Jonas Wind has been with Denmark since 2020 and has 15 caps and 5 goals, so not a bad percentage there, and is 23 years old. And he's currently with Wolfsburg in Germany since 2022, having moved from Copenhagen in Denmark. Copenhagen was his youth club towards the end of his youth club career there. So Jonas Wind was a starter in game 1 of Euro 2020, which was his first tournament, but he was subbed out at 63 and then lost his starting position, coming in only one more time as a substitute in the semi-final game there. So Jonas Wind, we consider a likely candidate, but I do believe there's a injury warning on Jonas Wind, so we'll get to that towards the end of the podcast. Finally, Kasper Dolberg, only a possible candidate here. Since the Euro 2021 Cup, he has started only 2 of their 13 games, subbed in for 3 of those, and not selected for 8 others. But the reason I'm surprised by that is because he actually did well in the Euro Cup, which we'll get to. But Kasper Dolberg has been with Denmark since 2016, and he has 37 caps and 11 goals and is 25 years old. He plays for Nice in France and has done so since 2019. However, he was loaned to Sevilla in Spain in 2022 and is still with them. He also played for Ajax in the Netherlands as well. So Kasper Dolberg's first tournament was the 2018 World Cup, but he only appeared in Game 3 there, where he was subbed into Game 3. So didn't see much action there. In Euro 2020, he also started as a substitute, but he was subbed into Game 3 on the hour mark, and then he gained a starting position for the remaining 3 games, so the after the group stage, and he lined up as a sole forward in all 3 starts and scored 3 of their 12 goals. So did quite well there. So you might understand my surprise to see that he hasn't been selected that much since the Euro Cup. Kasper Dolberg. Okay, now just a couple of names who seem to be off the squad. Marcus Ingevardsson, he last appeared for the team in September 2021, so briefly after the Euro Cup, just for a cap. He scored a goal in the one game that he played, but didn't last with the team there, so not called up after September 2021. Michael Ure got his first and only appearance as a substitute in November 2021, so he also came and went, and he is with Philadelphia Union in the USA since 2022. And finally, Nikolai Jorgensen, we talked about at the beginning, he was the starter for the 2018 World Cup. He was the starting forward there. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the player-by-player part of the podcast. And so we're going to go back to some of our discussion notes from the beginning of the podcast. So these were takeaways from the previous podcast that we did. And these are kind of focused on the team or the squad. So we said that they do well if they reach the tournament. I won't repeat all of that stuff here, but generally, if they reach the tournament, they tend to do well in the tournament. So a good sign for them getting past the group stage here. They've been at a peak of form since 2016. We talked a bit about that too. And we also talked about them being galvanized by the injury or the heart attack of Christian Eriksen. That seemed to bring them together in the 2020 Euro Cup, and they are a pretty tight team, and that was half of my reason for saying that. Not only a tight team, but brought together by that difficulty. Now, throughout the player-by-player podcast, we've noted that a lot of players have been with Brentford in England. So actually, Brentford is owned by a person who's actually a bit of a mysterious figure called Matthew Benham. And Matthew Benham also owns the Danish club of Midfield. In addition to that, the manager of Brentford is Danish, so is bringing in a lot of Danish players, kind of calling them together, as it were. So we have 7 Danes who are on the roster now, and then a few more of them, like Christian Eriksen, have come and gone. So it almost feels like a little Denmark in the Premier League there. And this creates further tightness as a national team, since the players are playing with each other and training with each other all the time. So a call to arms at Brentford, perhaps helping the team, perhaps helping the team's performance. Finally, when we were looking at formations, we noted that their preferred setup is a, whoops, I got that wrong here. on the graphic is a 3-4-2-1. So 3 at the back, 4. So 2 central midfielders and 2 wingers on the defensive end of the midfield, and then 2 attacking midfielders on the right and left side, and 1 forward. So it sometimes does vary. We've seen a 4-1-4-1 and a 4-3-3, and we've also recently seen a formation that was a 4-2-3-1 and allowed Christian Eriksen to play as an attacking midfielder. And since he came back in March, I wonder if they might try out that formation a little bit too, rather than having him play out of position. Okay, well, actually, that was the notes section for the club. We've mentioned all of their clubs in the play-by-play, in the player-by-player discussion, but we'll just kind of summarize it here. So we have quite a few players playing abroad. In fact, most of them kind of play for Brøndby or Copenhagen, and then try to move on to a bigger club in Europe. So we have Kasper Schmeichel, who was playing for Leicester City, now has moved on to Nice in France. But Yannick Vestergaard remains at Leicester City, and these aren't necessarily the top English clubs, but they are near the top. Andreas Christensen was with Chelsea, which is kind of a top English club. But we do have Martin Braithwaite. He was with Barcelona. I think he moved on to Espanyol in Spain. So actually, it kind of seems like some of them have, some of the aging players have kind of moved on from some of the bigger clubs too. But nevertheless, big clubs in Spain, Italy, Ajax in the Netherlands, but perhaps not the biggest clubs in those countries, but more like the second tier teams in those countries, in a lot of cases. Okay, let's move on from that. So a pretty good club affiliation, but I wouldn't say as good as, say, some of the French team, some of the other teams that are in this cup. Nevertheless, their good club affiliation is part of the reason that they've been doing better. We saw a peak of form since 2016. So part of the reason they've been doing better. Okay, well, if you've listened to other podcasts, you'll know I'm running kind of some statistics on the teams as we go through them. So one of the things we've been looking at is how many players have been called up since 2020, or kind of how many players are on the table for Denmark to be dealing with. And we've seen some countries, Mexico and USA, for example, still have more than 60 players that they have on the table, but Denmark not so many at 45. In fact, it's lower than average. The average is 53, so a manageable number of players for Denmark. And then the total number of players kind of under more serious consideration is 34. So they have to reduce the squad to 26. So that would mean that 8 of the players that we considered would have to be dropped from the team. And again, the average there is 36. So they are slightly below average, and it shouldn't be hard for them to reduce the team to 26 players. Finally, we have kind of definite candidates or likely candidates. And for Denmark, that's 19. So 19 players seem certain to reach the cup. There's always a couple of surprises, late players coming in, or maybe players getting injured. So, basically, if we minus 34 from 19, they have to add 7 of those 15 players to come up with their final squad, give or take a couple for unusual circumstances, like players showing great form in the 3 weeks before the cup or something like that. So a pretty manageable situation for the Danish manager there. Some teams really have a headache in terms of selection. The actual number of definite or likely candidates is lower than average. 22 seems to be the average. But it looks like in central defense or among the forwards, for example, that still a few decisions to be made. Okay, moving on to their average age. Denmark has an average age of 26.8, so that is a little on the high end, but kind of in range. 25 to 27 is average, and they are a little bit on the high end of that. So we have Kasper Schmeichel at 35 years old, and Simon Kjær and Daniel Wass both 33. So they're getting up there. And in all, we have 10 players who are 30 or older. So that is 10 of the 34 players in the possible, likely, or definite category. On the other end of the scale, we only have 4 players who are 22 years old or younger, and 7 that are 23 years old or younger. So they tend to be a bit of an older team. And it looks like they'll probably have to do a bit of refreshment after the World Cup, because I imagine some of these players will be retiring after the World Cup. Their average number of caps kind of goes hand in hand with that. So they are at 31.7. Oh, sorry, I didn't write the average age. So 26.8 for the average age, 31.7 for the average number of caps, and that's a bit higher than average, which is 29.5. So it makes sense if the team is a bit older, they have a few caps. Now, I don't consider Denmark a high scoring team, but actually the stats here are quite high. They have 139 goals among those 34 players, and the average is 4.2 per player. So both of those are actually higher than average, which surprised me. I guess in Euro qualification, they have been scoring quite a bit. I'd have to look specifically at their tournaments, but I don't consider them a very high scoring team. But if we look at their forwards, I did talk in the player by player about some of the forwards kind of not delivering the number of goals that they should. Christian Eriksen has a goal ratio of 33%, which is quite good. He's not a centre forward, though. He's more of an attacking midfielder. And we have, surprisingly, the left back, Joachim Mile, at 31%. So that's an incredible ratio for left back. He has 9 goals in 29 games. And right attacking midfielder Andreas Skov Olsen, the reason he's kind of taken over that position is his good goal ratio at 33% also. So 7 goals in 21 games. Jonas Wind has 5 goals in 15 games, so not really enough games to say that he's a high scorer, but that's pretty good. But he's the only one among the forwards who have that kind of a ratio. So again, I was surprised that Kasper Dolberg wasn't used more after a good performance in the Euro Cup. He's at 28.5% in terms of goals. And I guess the reason that they're number of goals is quite good is because they do tend to get goals from all over the field rather than from their centre forwards. So the centre forwards not really scoring as much as they should be, but other players scoring. We saw the left defender there with quite a few more goals than defenders usually get, and even Thomas Delaney, a central midfielder, chipping in with goals, and Højbjerg, kind of goals from all over the field for Denmark. So actually that looks good, because they didn't seem a high scoring team in my mind. Okay, let's look at some players and issues. So one I mentioned with Kasper Schmeichel, he's played all of their games in and since the Euro Cup. So while that's good, I wonder if it has a bad side in that the backup keepers aren't getting enough field time with the national team. So what I worry there is if Schmeichel has an injury or some problem, that the backup keepers are not very experienced, especially with the national team. So perhaps a bit of an over-reliance on Kasper Schmeichel as the keeper. The central defence has been rotating, especially since Simon Kerr was injured. We're not dead sure about Kerr's situation, but it looks like he would come back before the Cup. And that would kind of make 4 central defenders rotating 3 positions, because they usually use a 3-man back line. So how is that going to be in the Cup? Will it be kind of a consistent group, or will there be more rotation? So my guess is that Vestergaard would be the one to go from the starting lineup if Simon Kerr returns. But they do have other players kind of coming into that central defence, sometimes a left back or a right back. In the middle of the field, they were pretty steady with Højbjerg and Delaney in the Euro Cup, and I believe in World Cup qualifying. But since then, they've kind of rotated quite a few players in and out of the central midfielder. So just a question as to whether Norgard or Jensen have made inroads into the team and will make up part of that central defense, central midfield. Will it be kind of a rotating position or a steady pairing there? We've seen that on the wings, it's mostly the defensive backs, the right back and left back, who are moving up to play in the winger role. So that 3-4-2-1 formation, which they've used more than other formations, has these outside backs playing as wingers, but it doesn't actually allow for the central attacking midfielder, which we'll get to in a second. Is this a decision they've come to, that they'll go within the Cup, or will they change up the position in the Cup? Well, they did change up the position once recently in the Nations League to make a central attacking midfielder position, which is Christian Eriksen's nominated position. He's kind of been wandering around the field a couple of times as a right central midfielder. And once, I think, as a attacking left midfielder, but his actual position is an attacking midfielder, probably in the center. So will they change up that formation to allow for his position to be used? And finally, in the forward line, who is going to be the starting centre forward? So Kasper Dolberg did well in the Euro Cup, but then wasn't used much after that, and they've gone with Cornelius and sometimes Wind. Neither of those have particularly strong scoring records as a centre forward, so I feel like they're kind of still looking for a starting centre forward. In this case, they've also used Braithwaite in that position, and Poulsen. I don't think I mentioned in the player-by-player, but Poulsen has been starting as centre forward, actually more than anyone else. But again, he's a right winger, not kind of an out-and-out forward. So a bit of a question as to who will be the starting centre forward. Let's look at some of their new players coming in. Actually, most of them haven't made solid inroads into the team since the Euro Cup, although a couple of players who got their start in the Euro Cup are now solidly in the team, like Joachim Mail, the left back, Rasmus Christiansen has made inroads. We think he's going to be a definite candidate to reach the cup, to reach the final squad, but not necessarily a starter on that final squad. But he's a new name to the team who has made fairly good inroads. Alexander Ba, just a possible candidate, and actually all of the ones I'll mention from here on in are just possible candidates. So they've played some games for the cup, but haven't really secured a position for themselves. Philip Billing with Bournemouth in England is a possible candidate who would be new to the squad. Jacob Brun-Larsen, a left winger. I think he started a couple of times as an attacking midfielder. Again, hasn't really made his way into the squad. But all of these have fairly good club affiliations. Alexander Ba, for example, plays for Denmark. Rasmus Christiansen for Leeds United. Brun-Larsen plays for Hoffenheim, and Mohamed Daramy is with Ajax in Netherlands. He's new to the squad and is a left winger, but hasn't really secured a spot for himself, so just a possible candidate. And finally, Jesper Lindstrom, an attacking midfielder who plays for Eintracht Frankfurt in Germany, making his way into the squad. So these are some of the younger players. Mohamed Daramy, the youngest, just 20 years old. In terms of injury, Simon Carr has a muscle injury, so the captain of the team and one of the starting central defenders until his injury. He got a muscle injury and wasn't available for the games in June. He also didn't play for his clubs in June, but I think he may have played for his club since then, which leads me to think that he will be back in time for the World Cup. But a muscle injury for Simon Carr, so a bit of a doubt now. So we will update this in the update podcast. Yusuf Poulsen also was out with a muscle injury for the last match there in June. But last I checked, he was listed as having influenza rather than a muscle injury, so it wouldn't take him 3 months to recover from that. So Yusuf Poulsen will presumably be back and available for the World Cup too, but he did miss the last match there in June. And finally, and perhaps a bit more seriously, Jonas Wind. And this is a recent thing. I think it was in August that he picked up this hamstring injury and has an unknown return date. And I have seen players return fairly quickly from hamstring injuries, so there seem to be different kinds. But in my mind, a hamstring injury is kind of a longer term injury, and because he has an unknown return date, looks like probably among the three players we've talked about, the least likely of those to be available for the Cup. But of course, as a likely candidate, they'll be hoping that he'll recover from that. Okay. Let's go through some of the notable absences here. And I'm thinking here in terms of people who follow the team from World Cup to World Cup. So I'm including, players or people who were involved in the last World Cup but haven't been that much involved soon. It may be that they were involved in Euro 2020 or else were off the team even by that time. But we begin with manager. And sorry about the pronunciation, but is it Age Harid? He was the manager for the 2018 World Cup, but was replaced in 2020. So he is no longer with them. Jonas Lothel was the backup keeper in the 2018 World Cup and 2020 Euro Cup, but he seems to have been replaced now, last appearing in September 2021. So it doesn't look like he'll be playing back up to Kasper Schmeichel. there. In the play-by-play, we talked about Matthias Jorgensen, or Zanka Jorgensen. He's still playing at the club level for Brentford, where quite a few Danish players are. But as far as the national team goes, he hasn't appeared since the 2021 Euro Cup. Henrik Dalsgaard, also no longer on the team. He last appeared in November 2020. He was a starter in the 2018 World Cup, but wasn't selected for the Euro 2020 Cup there. William Christ, we actually didn't talk about him in the player-by-player review, but William Christ was on the team from 2007 to 18 and had 84 caps with the national team, and he was a starter in the 2018 World Cup, but he got injured in game one in that tournament, so basically was out for the rest of the tournament. Actually, that was a nasty foul by Peru's Jefferson Farfane, I remember it, that left him with 2 broken ribs and a punctured lung. And really, he did play after that, but no, he didn't play after that. The World Cup was his last tournament there at 33 years old. Lasse Schoen, with Denmark from 2009 to 21 with 51 caps, but he last appeared in March 2021. So he was on the World Cup squad in 2018, but not in the Euro 2020 squad. And we did talk about Pione Sisto, who we actually have as a possible but unlikely candidate for this cup. He was a starter in the World Cup, although he lost his starting position there in 2018, and he wasn't selected for Euro 2020, but he did play a few games after Euro 2020, so or he was called up a couple of times, I should say. He only subbed in for one game as far as field time goes. And finally, we have Nikolai Jorgensen. I consider him kind of part of their ongoing search for a starting forward. So he's still playing in Denmark. No, he's unattached right now, still playing at the club level. But he's only 31 years old, but has been off the team since June 2019. So he was a starter in the World Cup, but he lost his starting position there. So all of those players, none of them kind of huge losses to the team there. Some of them veterans with the team for a long time, but none of them real superstars for the team in that notable absence category. Okay, we're going to just finish off here by going back over the squad and predicting starters for the squad. And yeah, we used to predict substitutes, but now we kind of think anyone who's named as a likely candidate, but a likely or definite candidate, but not a starter, will obviously be a substitute. So we won't spend too much time talking about substitutes, but I will name the definite and possible candidates and then predict the starter among them if I can. So manager Kasper Hjulmand, we doubt they'll change their manager before the World Cup here, so it looks like he'll be leading them through the World Cup. We'll call him a starter. Kasper Schmeichel will definitely be the starter, and if he isn't, they're going to have a bit of a problem because they don't have any likely candidates. They haven't really developed a backup keeper for the national team, so a couple of possible candidates there, but no likely candidates to mention, and Kasper Schmeichel as the starter there. Central defenders is usually a 3-man back line, and it's kind of been rotated around 4 players. That's partly because of the injury to captain Simon Kjær. And so my guess is that Simon Kjær will return, so I'm going to call him a starter. Andreas Christensen has probably been the most consistent as far as starts go. And I'm going to say Joachim Andersen as the starter. And I think Simon Kerr will replace Yannick Vestergaard, although I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's rotated a bit and Yannick Vestergaard does get a couple of starts. So those are the four candidates. Andreas Christensen is definite, Yannick Vestergaard and Joachim Andersen as likely, and Simon Kerr as possible because of his injury and because he didn't play any games in June. Although really, I secretly think that he is a likely to definite candidate depending on fitness. Left back, we have just one definite candidate, Joachim Mail. So he has nailed down that position, and there is a backup possible candidate. But to be honest, when it's not Joachim Mail, it's usually someone playing out of position rather than the possible candidate who's a left back. So maybe someone like Jens Stryger Larsen, who we okay, I'll go back to right back position. So we have Rasmus Christensen as a definite candidate to make the squad, but I don't think he's necessarily a starter for the squad. So I'm going to nominate Daniel Wass as the starter there, and Jens Stryger Larsen, who's also a likely candidate. I think he'll play backup as a left back. Rather than being a starter as a right back. But I don't think either he or Rasmus Christensen are starters. In the defensive midfielder, we have Christian Norgard as a possible candidate to make the team. I'm actually pretty sure he will make the team because they sometimes use him as a more defensive central midfielder, but not a starter. I think the starting central midfielder will be the definite candidates of central midfielder, Thomas Delaney and Pierre-Emile Højbjerg. I would even put Højbjerg ahead of Delaney there. And we also have a likely candidate in Matthias Jensen, but I don't see him as a starter. They have a shockingly few left midfielders, right midfielders. And none of those look like starters. And as far as left wingers and right wingers go, they've been using them more as attacking midfielders or outside forwards. But we do have a couple of candidates who look like starters there. Mikkel Damsgaard is a left winger who we consider definite, and I do see him as a starter. I'm not so sure, though, about Yusuf Poulsen. Actually, if he is a starter, I see him more likely as starting in the centre forward role than in the left winger position that he's designated for. But I'm not confident enough to say that he will be a starter. I think he will start some games, but I kind of think it'll be rotated. Trying to look for a good performer. On the right side, though, the right attacking midfielder, Andreas Skov Olsen has done a fabulous job of locking down the position since the Euro Cup. He wasn't a starter in the Euro Cup. Now I'm trying to think of whether he was in the Euro Cup at all. But anyway, he's done very well coming into the position. So he kind of locked down that position. I think he'll be a starter. And attacking midfielder, Christian Eriksen. Well, they haven't really been using the attacking midfielder position that much. And yet, how can you not put Christian Eriksen on the field as a starter? So I think he'll be somewhere, although a bit of doubt as to the formation and where he will actually be. And then among the forwards, we do have like a definite candidate in Andreas Cornelius. I think he might start a game or two, but I don't think he's what they're hoping for in a centre forward. And We have likely candidates in Martin Braithwaite, who actually played as a right attacking midfielder more, and Jonas Wind, who's an injury doubt, but I'm not confident enough to say either of those are starters. After the World Cup or after the Euro 2020, I would have guessed Kasper Dolberg, but to my surprise, they didn't use him that much as a forward. So I think they'll be searching for their starting centre forward, and I can't nominate any of these forwards or Yusuf Poulsen, who sometimes starts there, as the starter. So I think that's up in the air, perhaps depending on the form of these players as they come into the cup. So we may be able to provide a bit of an update when we do our update podcast in November. But from right now, it looks more like an uncertainty. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the podcast of Denmark's players. And as I just said, we will be updating in November as new information comes out. They're going to publish preliminary rosters and then reduce that to final rosters. So we'll probably do the podcast when the final rosters come out. Meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That is Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our Soccerphiles our website is written there on soccerphiles.captivate.fm, and I've been improving the show notes, so you can use the show notes to find links and information and navigation through this podcast. So thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.